A work of such terrible beauty that you'll struggle to look away. Cormac McCarthy's post-apocalyptic book The Road taught me a lot about how to write, not because of how it's plotted or how it's structured, but because of how it made me feel when I read it for the first time. A work of terrible beauty goes some of the way to describe this book, but as is always the case with words, they fall short. If you've never read it or watched the quite faithful movie adaptation, to simplify what can't be simplified, The Road is essentially the story of a man and his son on the road at the end of the world. A lot of this novel's power lies in its simplicity, and to understand what we writers can take from that to use in our own writing, we need to deconstruct it a little bit. We need to find those parts of the book that shine through the novel's overall darkness. Those are the passages I think that are the most important. I want to take a look at some dialogue and some description from The Road to see what we writers can learn from it and use in our own stories. So let's start with dialogue. I read a craft book recently that talked about just how important and crucial the first lines of dialogue in your story really are. That book was this one, The Linchpin Writer by John Fox, and I'll link it in the description. The suggestion he makes is that the first line of dialogue from your protagonist should be a crowbar that pries apart the whole book. It should be a microcosm that contains your entire book in miniature. This is definitely true for The Road, I think. You could argue that The Road has two protagonists, the man and the boy. Their first lines of dialogue, as we might expect, are to each other, and they really do represent the book in miniature. Here they are. I'm right here. I know. These lines demonstrate a property that is at the forefront of the entire book, which is simplicity shrouding layers of meaning. This is such a simple exchange that you could be forgiven for thinking it doesn't really mean much at all. But if we push past that layer of simplicity, there's more to it than that. This line comes, as many of the book's most poignant lines do, when the two characters are hunkered down in the darkness of the apocalypse against starvation and marauding gangs of cannibals and all manner of other terrible things. The man's first line, I'm right here, obviously represents his protection. The fact that he's ready to do whatever it takes to keep his boy safe. It's a reassurance that he's not going anywhere. The father's motivations and concerns are really easy to understand. And the boy's response, I know, seems really simple too at first. He's aware, he's acknowledging that his father's there. But as we get to know the boy and we realise he's actually full of this bottomless empathy, we realise this line isn't as simple as it seems. His first line is actually as much about reassurance as his father's is. The boy is letting his father know he feels safe. He understands the burden that his father's carrying, and he's doing his best to ease that. As we write our own stories, I think it's definitely worth thinking about what our characters' opening lines say about them. Do they represent the story as a whole? Do they provide insight into the story? And remember, just like in this case, they don't have to be beautiful or complex exchanges to have meaning. Simple language can carry as much weight as lyrical language can, if not more. It's not just those first lines that carry a lot of meaning despite their simplicity. It continues through the whole book. McCarthy's dialogue is all about what's being felt, but what's not being said, or what can't be said. Mastering that, I think, would be a fantastic skill for any writer to learn. Very hard to do, obviously, but definitely worth trying for. Here's an example from a little further on in the story that retains that simplicity of language, but the unsaid feeling behind it is much more powerful. This is a slightly longer passage, but I think it's really the very last line that contains all of the meaning. He woke whimpering in the night and the man held him. Shh, he said. Shh, it's okay. I had a bad dream. I know. Should I tell you what it was? If you want to. I had this penguin that you wound up and it would waddle and flap its flippers. And we were in that house that we used to live in, and it came around the corner but nobody had wound it up and it was really scary. Okay. It was a lot scarier in the dream. I know. Dreams can be really scary. Why did I have that scary dream? I don't know, but it's okay now. I'm going to put some wood on the fire. You go to sleep. The boy didn't answer. Then he said, the winder wasn't turning. It's really that pause that says everything. The boy is still haunted by this dream. It's still there. It's still bothering him, and he can't really communicate the horror of it to his father, and his father can't really protect him from it. This dream, of course, represents all of the horrors that could be waiting for them further on as they travel down the road. It's a suggestion that there is no safe home for them. It's a tiny line of horror that can be extrapolated to represent the entire book. His father wants to move and take action and put wood on the fire, but that won't take away the horror of it. It's simply written, but it's full of meaning. As someone who's read probably 90% of Cormac McCarthy's work, He has a really interesting relationship with simplicity. I've got some examples of description from the road that I want to show you because I think we can learn a lot from them about how to conjure really powerful images from really simple language. But before I show you those, I want to show you some different kind of description. As I said, McCarthy has an interesting relationship with simplicity, and sometimes he does use very complex, very lyrical, very beautiful language. The book's closing paragraph is a great example of this. It doesn't relate to the plot of the book exactly, so don't worry about spoilers, but it's full of that complex, beautiful language, and all it is really is a description of fish. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming, maps and mazes, of a thing which could not be put back, not be made right again. In the deep glens where they had lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. I think this is quite beautiful writing. Definitely conjures up an image for me. It's grand and it's a very poignant way to end a book. But I did have to look up what vermiculate meant. I really appreciate the occasional passage like this in The Road and in all of McCarthy's work really. But I think McCarthy's best description shows us that writers can hit readers really deeply using very simple and direct language. Take this example of yet another freezing cold night. It's written really simply, but just try and avoid feeling cold as you hear this. The nights were long and dark and cold beyond anything they'd yet encountered. Cold to crack the stones, to take your life. He held the boy shivering against him and counted each frail breath in the darkness. Whether it's grammatically correct or not, cold to crack the stones, to take your life says so much more to me than they were so cold they could feel their bones knocking together and there was a cold rising up inside them, a numbness in their chest, they felt like they would blah blah blah. You could go on like that forever. But it's the simplicity that transfers the chill of that night to the reader, wherever they are. One of my favourite lines in the book is a piece of imagery that I find so haunting that I often find myself thinking of it even when I'm not reading The Road. Again, it's written in relatively simple terms and kept relatively short, and that I think is why it's so powerful. It's about the great apocalyptic smoke cloud that's obscured the entire Earth and plunged the planet into semi-darkness. Dark of the invisible moon. The night's now only slightly less black. By day, the banished sun circles the earth like a grieving mother with a lamp. Again, simply written, but hugely powerful image. This simple simile contains that microcosm that the opening lines do, that representation of what the entire book is about. But as well as that, it contains so much scale, which if you've seen any of my videos, you'll know is something that I love. As readers, we're imagining being those characters, looking up into this grey sky with just the shadow of the sun or the moon, freezing with no light and no idea whether you're going to live for another week or not. But at the same time, we have this image of the entire planet engulfed with this obscuring cloak of smoke that not even the sun can properly breach. That line, by the way, about the grieving mother with the lamp, I distinctly remember the first time I read that on my first read through about 10 years ago. I remember simultaneously feeling so motivated to try and get better at writing because it made me realise just what is possible, just what you can conjure up in the mind of your reader. But then I also felt quite demotivated because I realised I could probably write for 1,000 years without writing a simile quite that good. That's one funny backwards thing about writing. You would expect that new writers would use simple, basic terms, and that advanced writers would use the more beautiful and complex and lyrical writing, but it's usually the other way. Writers start out overwriting and have to learn how not to. That's an important part of any writer's progression, I think. The realization that real skill isn't using the best, fanciest, most impressive words to tell a story. It's telling the most impressive story using the simplest words. Meaning comes with simplicity, and I tend to find it takes a great deal more craftsmanship to communicate meaning clearly in simple terms than it does to intricately carve a story out of jewels and emeralds. Writing is about communicating the meaning or the feeling of something to a reader. It's a hugely complicated process, but I think that, strangely, simplicity is the best shot we have at achieving that. For more videos like this, why not consider subscribing? Thanks so much for watching. See ya.